Welcome to Tipsy Topics with Tory and Tom. We have a wonderful guest today, and I cannot wait to share this program with you. However, I have to give a few announcements for our wonderful sponsor, Carson's Brewery. And if you don't have an awesome mug for your battle-ready beer, like I do here from a local artist, they do have some beautiful glassware, tap room, accessories, and other options that you can buy when you visit. Now, why should you visit? For a myriad of reasons, but I'll give you a few. Starting on Halloween, they're going to be releasing a brand new beer, so keep in tune for that. Carson's anniversary party is October 10th, and with this anniversary party is going to be a release of a white stout and Carson's Comedy Festival. And every Monday at 7 o'clock, they have beer trivia tap room, and they also have a hot dog food truck, so please be sure to take a look at that. Every Wednesday at 7 o'clock is beer bingo, as well as having that wonderful hot dog food truck. And they also have a new program starting on Thursdays at 7 p.m. called Horror Movie Nights. Please check their website for more information. And for the better looking person in this TTT is going to be Tom Lonnberg introducing our guest. So Tom, take it away.
You are a convincing liar, Tory. Well, thanks.
Sure.
Thanks for the kind introduction. I thank Carson's also. We're so excited, pleased to have with us today Miss Karen DePauw, the manager of local history services at the Indiana Historical Society. Karen has been with the Historical Society since 2015, with also including previous experience with the Connecticut Historical Society for 6 years. Karen earned a BA in history from Quincy University and an MS in Historic Fashion and Textiles from the University of Rhode Island. She is the author of 2 books, The House of Worth, Fashion Sketches 1916 to 1918, and The Karen Display of Historic Clothing, published in 2017. And Karen, we're most grateful that you're graciously taking time to converse with us today about the relationship between underwear and fashion over the past 2 centuries. Well, I could say we could be brief about this, but I guess we shouldn't go to those play on words quite yet. But Karen, thank you so much for joining us. And I guess initially we might be interested in knowing, how did you become interested in underwear fashion history?
Of course, Tom. Well, thank you both, Tom and Tory, for having me on. It was such a pleasure to hear from you and get this invitation, and I am happy to do this. So it should be a fun time talking about underwear for a little while here. So my interest in old underwear, you could say, actually came from the fact that I've always been very interested in historical clothing. And I didn't really care that much about the underwear initially, because I was just like, oh, one white petticoat, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. But then when I actually started working at the Connecticut Historical Society, one of my jobs was to dress the mannequins. So when I would dress the mannequins, I realized just how important it is to have the right undergarments on a mannequin in order to make the outfit right. You know, if you put, and especially on a person too, you know, if you put a modern bra and underwear on a woman that you're trying to make look like she stepped out of the 1860s, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
it really made me realize how important that was. And, you know, started learning more about the roles that industrialization played in the way underwear looked and different things like that. And it just kind of started to make me realize that maybe if you have seen one petticoat, you haven't seen them all. Most of them, but not all of them.
You can start to differentiate. Before we jump into more recent history, can you just give us, is there a little bit to give us about the earliest days of underwear, or how that might have looked way back when?
Or how did it come into be as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, so underwear really, it doesn't really have a start point so much as its necessity. So, and underwear looks very different. And I know once we start talking about kind of 19th and 20th century underwear, rather, we'll get a little bit more into how that outward fashion affects it. But for the most part, underwear started out as pure necessity. It was usually made out of either linen or cotton. One of the reasons is that there is old I guess you could call them old wives' tales. It used to be believed in some cultures that having animal products next to your skin was not healthy. So if you were wearing, let's say, a wool dress in medieval England, that shouldn't touch your skin. So instead you would be wearing a linen or a cotton undergarment first. Those were also usually cheaper fabrics. So again, a lot more affordable to have those next to your skin where they're getting stained, they're getting gross with the everyday work of being human. Because a lot of times, and we see this especially when we enter into kind of the 16th century and beyond, you don't want to wash those delicate outer pieces so much. You know, if you're wearing a silk dress, you don't want to wash it that frequently, if at all. You just want to kind of spot clean it, or a men's silk suit from the 18th century. But what you can do is you can thoroughly wash your cotton or linen undergarments pretty vigorously, get out stains and smells and all that fun stuff. That you could really get that out of those cheaper fabrics and have those cheaper fabrics really protecting your outer garments, because we don't think about it so much anymore, because now, you know, you wear a tank top or you wear a t-shirt all day, and that's what gets smelly on a hot Indiana summer August day. And so the whole thing goes in the washing machine and you don't really think about it. But for them, you know, if you really stop to think about, okay, well, if it weren't for the act of being human that made it need washing, then unless you spilled your dinner on you, it doesn't really need washed. So by wearing undergarments, you really helped to protect your outer garments as well.
Wow.
So that's kind of some of the ways that it started. A lot of times it also just started as simpler versions of outer garments. For instance, men, frequently their underwear consisted of their shirt that was just very long and could get tucked between their legs and into their breeches. Or into whatever style of pants were popular at the time. And for women, it usually consisted of something called a chemise, which is basically just a giant, unshapely couple of squares of cotton or linen that are sewn together that basically fit you like a slim dress underneath, a lot like a slip. And so that is kind of where it started.
So when we're looking back to where we sort of evolved to today, is it in the past couple hundred years that people started more commonly wearing underwear, like everyday people, and then sort of evolves to today? And if so, what would that have looked like back, you know, a couple of hundred years ago or so?
So underwear has always been a pretty non-economic issue. The look of your underwear might change just as the look of your outer garments might change. For instance, in like the Elizabethan era, when lace making was really getting underway, you might, as a noble woman, you might have had a little bit of lace on the collar of a chemise that might have shown, but a poor woman was also wearing a chemise. It didn't have anything fancy on it. So you were always kind of wearing something because of that protection piece. But it really has been kind of in the last 200 years or so that underwear has really become something that is fancy and designed and full of lace and full of special little touches that's kind of meant to be seen, or maybe not necessarily so hidden away from everyone. Whereas before that, it was really just so utilitarian that it wasn't even given a thought that you would spend the money on pretty silk ribbons to put on anything, because no one was going to see it. So really, unless you were kind of a noble one who was just doing it because they could, because what else were they going to buy? And so they bought more silk ribbon to put on their underwear that no one would see. That's kind of where those differences come in, not so much, excuse me, with the wearing of it as with the decoration that might have been on it.
Yeah, interesting. If we get into the 19th century, does like the Industrial Revolution and mass production and in that sort of Victorian Edwardian age, does that enter into underwear and what we're seeing with that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It makes a huge difference. So whether you're talking kind of in the 19th century, I think anyone who's vaguely interested in history understands that a whole heck of a lot happened in the 19th century. We have 2 industrial revolutions. We have just a lot of social changes and cultural changes and industrial changes and a lot of things that make a big difference. And both of those industrial revolutions actually had different effects on undergarments and different effects on the outer garments and therefore the undergarments. So for one of the big things that really comes about in the 1840s, 1850s is that the outer garments of women and the shape of women's clothes had really started to grow. You really wanted this small waist, which was in part something that you could do through wearing a corset, but also you could do it by wearing a lot of petticoats, and therefore if your skirt looked bigger, your waist looked smaller. So it was proportions. And so in the 1840s and before that, when you wanted a big skirt, you frequently were just wearing maybe 6 or 7 petticoats at a time. So that's a lot of weight, and that's a lot to carry around and really cumbersome on your legs. So in the 1840s and 50s, after that first kind of big industrial revolution, you start to see these steel cage crinolines. Sometimes we commonly will call them hoop skirts, you know, gone with the wind, think gone with the wind. So really that use of thin, pliable steel is what made it able for us to create those kind of petticoats and skirts that would hold the garment out. And therefore now you're just wearing probably your chemise and maybe a small petticoat underneath, and then one petticoat over the cage. So you're really kind of, we look at it now and we think, oh my gosh, how ridiculous. But the reality is that it actually was really freeing, because it allowed you to walk easier and your legs got more movement. It was much cooler. So there were actually a lot of benefits. And then when you roll into the second industrial revolution and kind of the turn of the century, one of the things that we see is we see the better production of mass manufactured lace. So once lace is no longer necessarily handmade and there's some really good high quality imitation or machine made lace, now you start to see it on a bunch of undergarments, because you can afford, even a middle class woman or a lower class woman can afford to buy a petticoat that has maybe at least just a little trim of lace at the bottom, so that when she lifts it up in the streets, you can see that little bit of lace. Or to have petticoats, you know, it's not infrequent in the Edwardian era, we see petticoats that have lace panels that go from floor basically to the knee or to the upper thigh even, because they could. And it became this, you know, lace being all over the place was really popular. There's something right at the turn of the century called a lingerie dress that becomes very popular. It's a white dress with a whole lot of lace on it. And it's meant as an outer garment. It was worn for things like garden parties or graduation ceremonies, things like that. But one of the things that it does is it gets its name from the fact that there was white lace all over petticoats. So anything with that white lace really drew to mind that idea that you were maybe seeing something you weren't supposed to see, or you were seeing this lingerie dress that was based off of these petticoats that women usually kept hidden away. And I will warn you, if you want to see beautiful pictures of lingerie dresses, they're quite beautiful. Don't Google it at work. You find very surprising things.
Yeah.
Good tip.
So out of curiosity, can you give us like a very rough estimate of how much these petticoats and dresses would have weighed back at that time?
Yep. So it kind of depends on exactly what time you're talking about. So if we're talking about just kind of the average middle class woman, she's probably, for the majority of I would say the second quarter of the 19th century, she's probably wearing 5 or 7 pounds of petticoats. So one of the things is that another thing that we frequently think of as being kind of this torture device for women are corsets. And corsets get a bad rap. In part, corsets are not all that bad actually if they're made to you. If you go in and you get a corset that is made to your figure, it is very helpful, actually. It is very comfortable. If you get a poorly made corset and you just go, you know, now if you were to go buy one off the rack, it's probably not going to be that comfortable and probably going to just be something that you wear when you have to.
I hope Tom is taking notes.
I am copious. Yeah.
So, you know, corsets were made to fit the wearer. And by doing so, one of the things that corsets really did was they not only supported a woman's body and supported her back and her bosom and all of those things, but they also helped support the weight of the petticoats. So if you're wearing, you know, if you think about it on, if you're a woman and you've ever worn, or actually a gentleman, even if you've ever worn like athletic shorts that have an elastic band, and on a hot day it just digs in and it gets itchy and it's not comfortable. The same thing would have happened if you had just, you know, the thin drawstring of a petticoat tied around your waist. All of that weight would be digging in on that one little 1/4 inch stretch of where that petticoat was.
Yeah.
Yep, but by wearing a corset, your entire midsection is now holding that weight from the petticoat. So yes, it's still heavy. Yes, it is still cumbersome. But if you have to wear them anyways, or if you're going to wear them anyways, then it's certainly helpful to have a corset on, because yeah, you could easily be wearing 5 or 6 petticoats. I did an experiment once when I was in high school. My family did some historic reenacting. And one of the events, the only Civil War event we did, was in my hometown. And one year it was so rainy and gross, but the event went on. And so I put on everything that I wore, you know, my hoop skirt, my corset, my petticoats, all of it. And I weighed myself. And then I weighed myself when I got home just to see how much water had basically wicked up from the bottom. I had gained 15 pounds in water weight just from the garments getting so heavy. So even beyond just it weighing 5 or 7 pounds when you get started, it might weigh more by the end of the day. Whew. It was a lot.
I'm grateful for what I have today.
Right? Just wear some wellies and some long jeans and you're good to go.
Hence right now.
So if we move from that period and get into, I don't know, the 1910s, 1920s, sort of the flap rage, I guess we'd call it here in the United States, are things evolving in fashion too, and in underwear too, and becoming a little less cumbersome?
Oh, yes. So as you see kind of changes happening in outer garments, you really start to see some changes in undergarments. So for instance, in the 19-teens, dresses become really popular and really slimline. You know, they kind of, the skirts start to fall from the hips, not so much from the waist. You don't have these voluminous skirts anymore. Well, if you don't have that much skirt that you're trying to puff out, you don't need as many petticoats. And one of the things that you also start to see is if you're wearing a skirt and a top, then wearing a petticoat that stops at your waist, you don't notice anything. There's not like a weird line or something. But if you're wearing more dresses, then you want a really slim look underneath of it. So we actually, in around 1900 or so, we get what's called the princess slip, which really looks like our modern slips now. It's one piece from shoulder to knee or ground or whatever matches your outfit you're wearing. And you would really kind of wear that, and then you'd still have some version of that chemise like we talked about before. The idea of having one cotton or linen piece that is directly next to your body sticks around for a really long time. So you'd still have that, and then you'd still be wearing your corset for a little while, but the corset has moved. It's changed shape as the outer garments have changed shape. So in the 1860s, your corset kind of ended just below your waist, because after that, your skirt got so big, no one noticed anything or cared. But in the 1910s, if you think about the movie Titanic, those dresses stay pretty slim all the way down the body. And so in order to keep that figure the way you want it, your corset needs to follow that same line. So we get something called the long line corset, which comes up, begins just below the bust and goes all the way down past the hips. So that's all of the part that it's smoothing. It's a little bit more like the Spanx that we all so lovingly wear when we absolutely have to. So it's a little more like that. And because it's no longer supporting the bust, it actually becomes the reason why you start to get at the turn of the century what will become the modern brassiere.
Mm-hmm.
So then by the 1920s, we've got skirts have raised. We've got even less need to have a female figure accentuated because we want to look boxy and tubular. So you're down to just wearing kind of your brassiere and what they would call tap pants, excuse me, which is basically evolves to be our very fitted underwear. But that might be all you're wearing, that or just a little slip.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely that change after World War I definitely becomes a big one.
Is this, I mean, I know there's always resistance to certain things. Is this based, are people of an older generation more accepting of this than, I mean, less accepting of change like this than the younger women who are probably, you know, wanting to be rebelling, and if it irritates their elders, even the better? Or do you have any sense of any of that? Or
I think it tended to be just like it is today. You know, when we go hang out at our grandma's houses, she's still wearing, I don't know about you all, but my grandmother for years was still wearing, you know, embroidered sweatshirts with a little lace collar, and it was great. But for her, fashion kind of stopped in 1990. Like, fashion kind of stopped for her when she stopped working. She went all in for comfort over style of any kind. She wore what she was used to. One of my other grandmothers, I was probably in 6th grade, so it would have been the mid-90s before she stopped wearing house dresses.
Wow.
Because it was just what she was used to. She was a farm wife. It was easy. You know, they're having a great resurgence now thanks to the pandemic, but but it was just so much what she was always used to. It wasn't because she was necessarily against the things that, you know, the jean jumpers that my mom was wearing in the mid-90s. It just wasn't what she was used to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think the same thing goes with that. One of the things we talk about a lot in fashion history is that people associate the study of fashion so much with the study of extant garments and think, oh, well, you know, like at IHS, we don't have a fashion collection. We don't have a historic object collection. We have a paper-based collection. But in that paper-based collection are photographs. And I've many times had someone email me a picture of a photograph and they're like, you know, we're trying to narrow down the date. We've narrowed it down using all of these aspects. You know, we know when this building got built on this corner of the streets. We know what the photographic process dates it as, but we want to narrow it more. Can you do that by looking at the image and looking at the people in the image and dating their fashion? And the truth is that when it comes to something like that, what we end up with a lot of times is the concept of a no earlier than date, because what we can't take into effect, because we can't ask the people in the picture is, you know, if it's a faraway street scene, we don't know if the 3 women that we can see that we're trying to date this photograph from, if they are in their 70s, then their fashion choices might actually be 10, 20 years old. Whereas if those 3 women are 20, then it's probably a lot closer to when that style first became popular. So while we don't really see, I've not seen anything that was necessarily a big push one way or the other, like a big uprising that happened. Most of the uprising that happened in that change happened more along the idea of women and men pushing against kind of the idea of Victorian values. So they weren't pushing against so much the clothes of their parents were just part of it. It was mostly about the rules from their parents.
what it represented.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm not sure how much of that is actually based in their clothing, and that, you know, I'm sure there were plenty of women who were happy to have the shorter skirts and, you know, the flapper style and ditch some of their corsets and things like that, but who also would never have been caught dead in the backseat of someone's car, or would have never rolled their stockings down below their knees. You know, we're the primest and properest of 1920s women.
Yeah. So in the 30s, we had the Great Depression. The 40s, World War II for half of it. Is much happening fashion-wise during those sort of challenging times economically, and then rationing and all of that's happening? Are things changing?
They are. So in the 1930s, one of the things that you start to see in the 20s and after is who is affecting fashion, and therefore undergarments starts to change. So at the turn of the century and kind of in that later 19th century, a lot of who was really popularizing different fashions were women and men of royal descent, men and women. You know, just because we weren't part of England anymore, it didn't mean we didn't look to them for fashion advice. We looked to Paris a lot, to the fashion designers who had gotten started in the mid-19th century. So we were really kind of relying on the rich and the super upper classes of society to tell us what we should be wearing. When you get to the 1920s and 30s, more men and women start going after what they think is best, what they think is most comfortable. It's actually really interesting. In the late 20s, after the stock market crashes in 29, and then in the early 30s, there's a really big push by the fashion designers in Paris that women's skirts need to get long again, because for a myriad of reasons, one of which being because there was a depression happening still in Europe from World War I. And one of the ways that France frequently fought against depressions was through the fashion industry, because they were such a part of the creation of textiles and their use. And so Paris and England start putting out all these things about longer skirts for women. And women in the United States were like, no, I like my short skirt. This is great. Like, maybe I'll take it to like just below my knee, but we're not going back to these floor length skirts. Like, that's for dinner. That's for dancing. I don't need that in my daily life. So you actually really see all these men and women going, you know, this is what I like, and this is what I want. In the 30s, we see a big push for Hollywood to be kind of the fashion makers, in part because it's an escape. In the middle of the Great Depression, going to a movie for a nickel gives you a really great way to ignore what's happening at home. So we see a lot of really slimline things happening. We see a lot of women really kind of going with the bare necessities underneath of their garments. You can really, the 1930s is really one of the first times in modern history that we see, in Western modern history, I should say, that we really see a woman's form become her own. You know, yes, you might be wearing a girdle, you might be wearing these kind of shapers. You know, if you are a curvy woman and you want not to be, you've got to wear a girdle. If you want a smaller waist, you might be wearing a girdle, which is basically just the modern rubberized version of a corset. It's kind of what bridges the corset to the Spanx. So you would wear some of those things, but it's really, underwear before that had really been not just a necessity for our clothing, but there was also pieces of modesty built in. So you wore your chemise and a corset because you were supposed to, not only because you needed it to make your clothes look right. Well, in the 1930s, the less things you had under it made your clothes look right. And so it's the first time we really start to see these movie stars who are practically wearing nothing and just wearing these slinky little dresses, and you can tell that there is not much underneath of it. There are not 6 layers of petticoats. There's not 6 layers of anything. So that really kind of makes a difference. And then as we get into World War II, the rationing really starts to make an effect. In the 1930s, we start to see nylon as a fabric come into play, or as a textile and a fiber. And one of the things that we see is nylon pantyhose being made for the first time, or nylon stockings rather, being made for the first time in that period. But nylon very quickly gets rerouted to the war effort. So you only see nylon stockings for about 3 or 4 years in the late 30s, and then it all goes to the war effort. So then women are back to silk stockings. And so the other thing that happens is that in the 1940s in America, there was a huge push towards women kind of intentionally stalling out fashion so that it wasn't unfashionable for you to wear your dress from 2 seasons ago if it still fits you. That it was very fashionable. You could get clothing patterns that just helped you remake a sleeve so that your sleeve could be more puffy maybe this year than last year, but it didn't cost you any more fabric. You didn't buy a whole new dress, you remade something you already had. And that in turn then reflected, if there weren't a lot of silhouette changes, there weren't a lot of necessary undergarment changes either, which was also important because all those things that we use, you know, all the rubber that was used for corsets or for girdles was also heading to the war effort. There was something in the United States called the L85 restrictions, and those were rationing laws that had directly to do with clothing. So it was little things like for men, you couldn't buy a new suit that was double-breasted because it used too much fabric. You could only have so many pockets in a garment because it used too much fabric. Women's skirts could only be so full because it used too much fabric. So, and then,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that follow-up to that is then why in the late 1940s and then the 1950s, you see this comeback to small waist, big skirts, because it's, oh, here are all the things you said I couldn't have, and now I'm going to have them all.
Excellent. I think we have about 6 or 7 minutes left in our segment here. And so can we get into a bit about, you know, what happens in the latter part of the 20th century? I guess being latter, I mean, you know, 1960s rebellion and we see a lot of things happening in that era and how we sort of evolved to where we're at today. I know that's a big question in a short few moments, but if we could touch on that, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. So just to kind of run down a list for you, some of the things that we see that really happen in that latter part of the 20th century are in the 1960s, when we see mini skirts become really popular. That's actually when you start to see the popularization of the idea of tights, and when tights are invented. So you now no longer have to worry about your short skirt exposing like your garters that are being used to hold up your stockings. Instead, you've got just one garment, goes all the way up. You even start to see then like control top pantyhose and tights, so that now you don't even need a girdle. You just have this one garment, and it does it all for you, which is great when you're wearing a tiny little mini skirt. So that's something that, you know, again, that's outside fashion directly relating to underwear. In the 1920s and 30s is when we really kind of got what will become kind of the bra that we all know and love. And in the 50s is when
I'm not arguing.
I see Tory nodding a lot and Tom just silent.
Well, to wear some of the ball gowns and things that I wear. Gosh, this just hits home.
So in the 50s, though, is when we really start to see the things that we're really familiar with now. So things like underwires and padding, and we see the cone-shaped bra. The cone-shaped bra thing was a weird fad, and I'm glad it never really came back, except for Madonna for a hot second. In like the 60s and 70s, we get this idea, we kind of go back to the 30s idea of like a natural look, like whatever shape your body is, it's okay. Granted though, by the 60s and 70s, there's a huge push to be starting to like work out, and especially into the 80s. So the idea may be that you should let your body look the way it's going to look, but it better look perfect because you should be doing crunches. And every once in a while I hear about the way this happens, Tori, and I'm like, you know what, corsets don't sound so bad.
Exactly.
No crunches, no gym time, I'll take it. Yep, sign me up. So you kind of see some of those shifts happening. we see an interesting shift so in the 1980s, we get this huge shift into an even bigger exercise movement with Jane Fonda and all these workout at home, calisthenics, all those kind of fun things. So in this push, one of the things that we also see is we see this idea of underwear becoming somewhat acceptable outerwear. You know, not necessarily, it's going to be another 10 or 20 years before you see the idea of like walking down the street wearing a sheer shirt with your bra showing. Mm-hmm. But the idea that, you know, workout wear really does mirror more closely the styling of undergarments at the time than anything else. So really kind of seeing that as this outward style of underwear. Another thing that's really interesting that has happening in the 80s is that as more women are moving into the workforce, and kind of this concept of the power suit and the idea that from the outside you need to kind of play with the men, you need to wear a suit, you need to wear a tie, you need to do all of these things, and really kind of to compete in that world. On the flip side, we see this huge popularity jump of going back to lacy undergarments. So lacy, silky teddies and slips, and things like that. So on the one hand, women are being told to look outwardly, like be manly on the outside in some ways, but don't forget to be super feminine. And we're going to help you do that by this thing that we're actually going to hide. So it's an interesting tactic that everything takes.
Well, this is a great conversation. I think we could go on for a very long time in talking about underwear. So
you never would have thought, would you?
Well, you know, I was told my wife last night I've been reading about underwear all day. So all in a day's work.
It's true.
Karen, we really appreciate your taking time to share with us. It is incredibly interesting how this has evolved over the decades and centuries, and just giving us again a little play on words, a brief look at this, because I know there is a lot more, but we certainly appreciate your sharing with us, and we always appreciate the good folks at the Indiana Historical Society and all the good things they do for us throughout Indiana.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, there is definitely, we barely scratched the surface.
Yes,
we barely even talked about men. So
well, yeah, we might have to have part 2 in order to have equal time for the guys. But
good news is things didn't change much, as unfortunately usually happens.
And we should thank again our friends at Carson's for generously sponsoring us these many times for Tipsy Topics. Tory, my friend, would you like to close this out?
Then again, thank you again, Karen. Thank you to Indiana Historical Society. We always appreciate everything that you guys do for the Hoosier State. And definitely have to thank Carson's again for their beautiful battle-ready beer that I hope that you take advantage of. But while we're here at this point, thank you for your time, and we hope to see you guys soon for our next installation of Tipsy Topics. Bye for now.